It's the biggest story in the country. Everyone is watching. And right now, President Biden on his way back from Israel, where he spent 7.5 hours on the ground there, meeting with the Israeli leaders and family members who had victims from the attack from Hamas on October 7th. It is a historic first. It's the first time a sitting president from our country has gone to Israel during an act of war. But as the U.S. talks more about its response to what's going on, local Islamic leaders here in Minnesota are calling for a ceasefire, for peace. Kent is here tonight with the latest from President Biden's visit to Israel and those peace calls. Kent?
Yeah, Jana, we'll start with that visit, which was thrust into uncertainty just hours before last night after a blast at a hospital in Gaza that killed roughly 500 civilians. World leaders were watching to see what President Biden would say about that, the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and the extent of our support for Israel. Biden made his support clear, saying the U.S. will stand with Israel forever while condemning the Hamas terror attack and vowing that there is no higher priority than the release and safe return of all hostages. But he also drew a distinction between Hamas and the majority of Palestinians caught in the middle in Gaza. He announced $100 million in new humanitarian assistance there, along with an agreement that Israel would allow food, water, and medicine to enter Gaza from Egypt. As for that blast at the hospital, which has sparked worldwide protests, Biden pointed to U.S. intelligence from our Defense Department indicating Israel is not responsible.
The vast majority of Palestinians are not Hamas. Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. I was outraged and saddened by the enormous loss of life yesterday in the hospital in Gaza. Based on the information we've seen to date, it appears the result of an errant rocket fired by a terrorist group in Gaza. The United States unequivocally stands for the protection of civilian life during conflict, and I truly grieve for the families who were killed or wounded by this tragedy.
Now, shortly after the president spoke, our local Islamic organizations and leaders came together to push for the U.S. to go a step further and negotiate a ceasefire to stop the suffering and make sure the aid gets through.
This is a moment for our nation to lead the world and to lead by an example of calling for peace and, most importantly, in this moment, calling for a ceasefire. For nearly 12 days, no water, no food, no electricity, and no one can escape it.
The Council on American Islamic Relations in Minnesota, which hosted that news conference, also held a rally at the state capitol that started about an hour ago. It was joined by some other local Muslim groups and an organization called Jewish Voice for Peace, an anti-Zionist organization. That group also organized a protest on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. earlier in the day. A few hundred people conducted a sit-in there while calling for a ceasefire. Some local Jewish leaders say those protests do not speak for the majority of their community. Today, I spoke to the executive director of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Minnesota and the Dakotas, and while he echoes the calls for aid and protecting innocent lives, he says calls for a ceasefire are premature.
I'm glad they're not conducting U.S. foreign policy, first of all. You can't have a ceasefire while people remain hostages. You can't have a ceasefire while the Hamas terror infrastructure is in place. So you had thousands of people murdered by the cross-border terrorist attacks, and no country would tolerate this, and no country would tolerate a unilateral ceasefire or an agreed-upon ceasefire if you would simply revert to the status quo.
Now, after the president left Israel today, the White House announced that President Biden will deliver a national address tomorrow night, and we will air it live on KARE 11 right after breaking the news. We're also told more ceasefire rallies will take place tomorrow outside the offices of our Minnesota congressional delegation. Jana.
Yeah, Kent, that was important news that came out late this afternoon. The American people want to hear from the president on American soil, and he does need to, perhaps, I'm hearing also, to answer to those protesters calling for a ceasefire, to explain it to people.
Yeah, this is one of those things that's certainly not going away, Jana. We've been seeing protests, both calling for a ceasefire and pro-Israel protests happening over the last few days. A lot of people asking what is our position here coming back from this trip we'll be hearing it tomorrow.
All right. Thanks so much, Kent. Appreciate it.